Mayor Commission Workshop. Today is Monday, March 14th. The time is 10:01 a.m. The item on the agenda is the Cyanotoxin Expert Panel findings and recommendations. Ms. Johnson, are you going to tee this up, or Mr. Fana? Mr. Fana, okay.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for joining us this Monday morning. In a moment, you're going to hear a presentation of the final report of the Cyanotoxin Expert Panel. But before that, I wanted to take a moment to thank our public utilities staff and to thank the expert panel members. They've been putting a ton of hours on this ever since last summer. And it's been a lot of work that's put into not just this report, but as you'll see, just things that we've been implemented over the past 8 months as well. Of course, the Mayor, I want to thank you for leading this effort to get a panel in place, and to the commissioners for your support, your patience, and of course our water customers, the most important of all, for their support and patience as well. Certainly I've gained an appreciation for the complexities of water treatment and just managing water, period, over the last 8 months. And whether you're an individual or an organization, you're not necessarily judged upon things that happen that are unexpected to you. We all have things that are happening that are unexpected, whether we're individuals or as organizations. It's how you respond to those things. And I think the city has responded very well, not only in the short term and making sure that our customers had clean and safe water. Within a week, everything was basically back to normal, which was incredible considering the circumstances. But also moving forward and getting things into place, better treatment options, and better ways of monitoring that have happened over the past few months as well, that has significantly reduced the odds of something like this happening again. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Director for Public Utilities, Daryl Graziani, who's going to kick off the presentation and then introduce the water panel expert who's going to proceed with it.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Daryl Graziani. I'm your Assistant Utility Director at the water plant, one of two. You're looking, I understand, if I'm your director, so that's good. Want to go ahead and start the presentation. Way back when, you guys supported us, and I thank you all for bringing in the help. There was 4 of us on May 28th, 2021, who were looking for a solution and a fix. And as it worked out, and you'll hear today, we did very well. Next slide, Eric. Dr. Eric Rosenhoff is in control today. He's driving the show through a Zoom. He's out of Virginia, and he's not here. With us, though, is Dr. Bob Cushing. Let's start. In August of 2016, the city initiated a very proactive monitoring and sampling program for 2 cyanotoxins, microcystin, which is the blue-green algae we always see, and of course cylindrospermopsin, one of its counterparts. This was a non-regulatory program, and it was implemented and was effective monthly sampling. The chart there shows what the data looked like over the past 6 years. The blue line there is our raw water. The orange line is our point of entry. That's the water, our finished water after treatment. And then last but not least, the gray line is the health advisory level for the vulnerable populations for the cylindrospermopsin toxin. So you can see through 6 years, we were able to control it. And last year, it broke through on us. Okay, since then, we've been able to bring it down with adjustments to our chemicals. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is a cyanotoxin? Okay, cyanotoxins can be produced by blue-green algae. This is the stuff that everyone sees in the newspaper, TV, and hears about on the radio. When certain conditions exist, such as warm water in our spring, high nutrients that come in from Lake Okeechobee, they mix together in our lakes and we get an algae bloom. Now, we've had algae blooms year after year. Most times it's good algae, it's nothing toxic about it. However, the cylindrospermopsin keeps showing up. Now, if it's not controlled within our source waters, okay, then we must control it in the treatment process. This is to avoid levels that wind up in our drinking water that are harmful to our public and to us. The microcystin on the top there, it's a pretty large chain organic toxin. This is the one that's generated from the blue-green. Can report that we don't see that at any real significant levels within our lake systems. The bottom one is the one that gets us. And this one we can't see. It doesn't form, there's not a flag, there's not a big algae bloom that we can say, oh, we need to take action. So this is why it comes and goes without even knowing it. Okay, so back in 2021, excuse me, back in May, the only way to really see these algae, the cylindrospermopsin, is either under a microscope, which we have that capability and we use, or through a laboratory analysis, which we now have that capability. Next slide, Eric.
Joe, before you go, can you go back to slide 2? I've got a quick question.
Go ahead.
It looks like we had an outbreak in 2017, if I'm reading this right.
You are. And it was a bloom, is what we'd say, versus an outbreak.
It was a bloom?
Yes.
What did we do then to address that problem?
The biggest issue that we found, and the health department came to us right after the event and asked for an operational evaluation. Later on, Eric is going to show you a pipe segment in our treatment process. That pipe segment went from about 4 to 5 minutes worth of contact time with the chlorine to about 1 minute to 2 minutes after the UV system was installed. That post-chlorination was always there for treatment of color. That was its intent, a final polishing step. It worked somewhat towards our bacteriological contamination as well. That reduction in time, and you'll hear me say once in a while, I thank the expert panel for giving me 15 minutes. That's what they found in all of the evaluation for us. So we went from 4.5 minutes on the back end to about 1.5. We picked up the UV wet wells there. That's added about 6 minutes worth of time. We need 3 minutes at 1 milligram or 1 part per million of chlorine to take this from 10 parts per million or 10 micrograms per liter down to the 0.7 level. And from our historical data, the highest we've gotten to is a 7.
All right, so when you say more time, that's more time exposed to chlorine.
Correct, more time in the water.
Okay.
At those levels. And that's what we needed, and I believe we found it, and these guys helped with all the studies we were doing to get there.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
A couple more questions, Mr. President.
The one thing on that, oh, sorry, I was going to say.
Thank you, Mayor. Back to that slide 2, please. So what I'm noticing on this graph is you've got the raw water, and there's huge spikes with those blue lines in several areas. And then you get to our most recent issue that we had, and you don't have such a spike from the blue. It's actually really not, doesn't look to be much more than the orange, which is the water after it comes through the plant, I guess, right? So why was there such a huge differentiation between that raw water and the water that comes out of the plant in other years, but here, the most recent one, there's really not that much of a spike in the raw water, but there's just as much of a spike in the cleaned water. If I'm saying that correctly, what does POE stand for?
Point of entry. That is going out to the public.
I'm sorry, so it's the point of entry in our water system.
Correct. And raw water comes into the plant, point of entry is going out of our plant. That's
Going out of the plant.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
That's what the feds call it.
So can you just explain why do we see such a difference in the two?
The big change that we saw here, those two huge spikes, the real high blue lines, in July of 2020, we were under a chlorine-free burn. We had switched. That was our annual maintenance. You heard me talking about minutes. When we're in free chlorine in the storage tank, we're in hours now. So I have all the contact time in the world that we need to destroy that toxin. So that's why when you see those really huge spikes, and it's like, wow, we did great, what happened? Well, we correlated those really big spikes to the free chlorine in the, in the tanks. Go ahead.
Let me just further explain, because we have to do a free chlorine burn every year. That's part of the maintenance. So it corresponded in those two cases, in those 2 years, with the algae bloom happening. So basically, while that was occurring, we were doing a free chlorine, which ended up destroying the cylindrospermosperm from getting into the distribution system. So it was a timing thing in that case. But how we do those free burns is, it's not like we're not looking for a trigger from cylindrospermosperm or other algae to do the free burn. That's an annual maintenance thing. So it's sort of luck in a way that we were doing the free burn.
Just so you know, Commissioner,
I'm not sure if I understand it enough to follow up with the question. Sorry.
Maybe it will become clearer as we get further down.
I agree. I agree.
There's a scheduled once-a-year free burn. It correlates with the county who does it theirs twice a year, and these just timed up these events at that moment in time. They both were occurring, and so it worked out that the public had safe water. That's the biggest deal to look at there. The disinfectant switch is in our toolbox. If the levels got so high that everything in the treatment plant still was not able to knock it down, that would be like our second big step in terms of adjusting all of our chemicals. Next thing is switch over, and we did do that last May, mostly because the system had run for a good bit at the high levels, and the question of what was in the distribution system, the time it takes to turn around a sample, we didn't have much choice, so we went that route. Okay. Let's go to slide 4, Eric. So a lot of what we were just talking about, this is this slide here. In response, we took immediate actions that reduced levels in both the raw water and the finished water or drinking water. Further steps in monitoring and treatment have significantly reduced the risk of a future repeat event. What does that mean? Well, when we first started this monitoring program, the turnaround on a sample was 5 to 6 days. Took the sample, shipped it up to Michigan. Michigan took a look at it, took their time, sent us a report back. We've switched to a local contract lab here in Florida. We're still looking at a 2 to 3 day normal turnaround on a sample. They can expedite and get it to us in 1 or 2 days when we ask and need it. But the biggest thing that we did was we created the in-house capability to turn samples around in 4 to 8 hours. That means that we can turn chlorine up or down, more pack or less of the carbon within a day, and see what the results are by the second day. That's important because we're working on a 10-day clock here. The health standard is 10 days exposure. So that's what we want to try and be, is have the water levels under control within that 10 days before we either switch to a chlorine, and after a chlorine to a do not drink, which is the last thing I ever want to see again, just so everybody knows. All right, so next slide, Eric. So here we go with our expert panel that was commissioned. The Mayor James commissioned this panel, and we went around the country. We picked out people that were familiar with cyanotoxins, that knew what kind of treatment we had to do and where it had to be done. This included Dr. Bob Cushing, where you at? Back here with us today. Dr. William Becker, who's on the call with us. Dr. Chandra Myshore, who's not on the call with us. Dr. Eric Rosenfeld, who is going to be leading the presentation in a few minutes. He'll take over. And there's one other person I'd like to thank, and that's Libby Blackie. She was the person who worked with us on the most important thing of the whole project, is the communications end, which was our biggest sore, I believe, last year. Waiting and coordinating with the agencies, trying to get the word out, and we were at the back end of that curve. And with her help, we've done a good job, I believe. Okay, Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Daryl. And thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to present here from Virginia. Although perhaps I wish you guys had been a little bit more strict about in person when I woke up and it was 24 degrees here this morning. It'd be nice to be joining you guys down in South Florida right now. I will be speaking on behalf of the panel, and I'll go through a summary of the report that was presented today and is ready for release. I wanted to contextualize just a little bit and describe that when we first got together as an expert panel, the first thing we did was come up with guiding principles. And from a technical aspect, we really wanted to make sure that anything we evaluated or came up with did the following things. First, we wanted to strive to produce the highest quality water for the customers of West Palm Beach. And second, in our evaluation, we made sure that we wanted to maintain a holistic source to tap perspective, essentially using all of the tools in our toolbox throughout the entire water resources and treatment perspective to make sure that we achieved number one. And then finally, when it came to treatment, we wanted to make sure that we leveraged multiple treatment barriers to ensure that we had a very robust treatment approach for future potential cylinders for mopsin events. So we could get back to those 2017s and 2020 responses where the high levels coming in were of no problem because we had very low levels coming out of the plant. So the key tasks of our expert panel work were to review the May 2021 event associated with the cylinders for mopsin detection with the elevated finished water cylinders for mopsin detection. Again, we wanted to take a holistic approach, so we analyzed source water, treatment infrastructure, and operations throughout this evaluation. And we brought this all together to provide near-term and long-term recommendations to the city, again, to improve the robust barriers and the ability to handle future cylinders for mopsin events. By way of a few milestones, in August 2021, we completed the review of the available treatment options and recommended some near-term actions to the city to really get started on helping reduce risk in the very, very short term. And then, as I mentioned, in March 2022, we completed the summary report that is now available documenting near-term and long-term recommendations from our evaluation. The summary report, here's the cover of the summary report, and the near-term and long-term recommendations from the report evaluated source water quality monitoring, recommended improvement in source water quality monitoring and management, focusing on several source water options, and we'll talk about these in greater detail in the following slides. Recommended water treatment optimization to reduce water quality risks from cylinders for mopsin in that finished water supplied to the customers of West Palm Beach. And it also recommended improving communications within the city, the regulators, and the customers of the West Palm Beach water system. The remaining portion of the presentation today will be organized as followed. I'll go into some extent, a little bit of detail on the source water evaluation, the treatment optimization actions, and the communications actions, and then we'll wrap it up with a proposed implementation strategy. Moving to the source water evaluation. The West Palm Beach system is a unique system in Florida as it's predominantly surface water. It's a predominantly surface water system, and most other utilities rely on groundwater in Florida. There's a lot of advantages to this approach, but there are some challenges with this, including challenges with algae and algal toxins, as we'll describe here in the rest of the presentation. The system depends predominantly on surface water, with 50% of that water coming from Lake Okeechobee, and the remaining portion of that are from rain-driven sources like the Grassy Waters Preserve. There is standby groundwater sources available during periods of drought, including the east and west well fields. And we'll talk more about how to implement these perhaps in some of the in future algal toxin events as well. The key findings from the expert panel related to source water showed that the data review implicated the lake system near to the water plant. In other words, Lake Mangonia, Clear Lake, and East Clear Lake. These were the areas where the cyanotoxin production occurred. It was not coming from Lake Okeechobee. It was being created in that lake system. And within that lake system, there were two probable hydrological conditions favoring excessive cyanobacteria growth, including low water elevation and water age at the time of the bloom in 2021. The other key finding was that using the well fields to blend groundwater into the lake system helped lower the cyanotoxin levels more rapidly than them just going away through normal flushing. So the ability to blend the groundwater was key to reducing the extent of the high levels of cyanotoxins in the source waters. Using these findings and extrapolating upon them, the expert panel provided the following recommendations, many of which have already been implemented by the city. On the monitoring front, the panel recommended increasing monitoring for algae identification and for cyanotoxins analysis. And that gets to those actions that Daryl spoke about earlier, where there was an in-state lab that they moved to reduce turnaround times, but then also purchased and have trained and are completely capable of performing cyanotoxin screening methods, which gives us data that's useful in understanding what's in the lakes and how to optimize operations to ensure improved treatment of cyanotoxins. There was also recommendations to revisit the water use permit, and the city has moved forward with meeting with the South Florida Water Management District, requesting temporary relief on some of the restrictions, particularly related to being able to supplement the system with the groundwater wells, and has submitted a water use permit application to create a more permanent ability to do these actions that reduce the risk. We also recommended a few studies, including one that's going on now, which is delving more into the ideas of how low water elevation and water age impact cylinder spermopsin risk, to provide mitigation measures for that. And future long-term, more holistic studies, including wellfield blending studies, lake water treatment options, and potential alternative water sources to help the city provide more robust source water to avoid some of these cylinder spermopsin events or other future events. Moving on to treatment optimization actions. There was a lot of study that was done in the treatment plant because you'll notice a lot of the recommendations for the source water will take a little bit longer to implement. And when it came to really improving the robust reliability of the treatment of these cyanotoxins, much of the work needs to be done by the treatment plant. So an extensive treatment evaluation was performed where we identified potential opportunities for risk reduction. We prioritized those in terms of near-term and potential long-term options. And then with those near-term options, we did extensive evaluation to ensure that we could identify optimization opportunities to ultimately improve the reliability of the existing treatment and operations infrastructure. And we had a timeline, we had a short timeline on this. We wanted to make sure that all of these opportunities were in place ahead of this upcoming algae season. So we've worked extensively with the city to improve that treatment optimization for cylinder spermopsin. And there are many actions where we're there, and the city is ready for this upcoming season. In our review of the treatment plant operations, we did find that the city has effective treatment processes for cylinder spermopsin, including the recently installed powder activated carbon basins. It's of note to realize that these were installed but not operational in the May 2021 event. However, that was quickly rectified, and these are now operational and ready to go in any future event. The other place we looked was in the chlorination portion of the treatment process. This speaks to the minutes that Daryl was speaking about earlier. And one of the important things to realize is that this yellow highlighted line here is what's called the post-chlorination segment. And that's what he was talking about. Before the upgrades and the installation of UV, this post-chlorination segment was about 4 to 5 minutes of chlorine contact time. When the UV building came online to improve disinfection at the facility, it significantly shortened this post-chlorination segment to just a few minutes of contact time. We evaluated that post-chlorination segment plus some alternative locations for feeding chlorine, essentially at the beginning of this UV building to take advantage of some extra contact time there, and also potentially here in the flume that conveys water from the sedimentation basins to the filters. All of that allows for extending the contact time and improving the ability to treat cylinder spermopsin.
Mr. Flume,
Just for a little bit of oh, yep, go ahead.
and I got your name wrong. We do have a question for one of the commissioners, Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make a point of clarification. In your presentation, you had mentioned the powder activated carbon, and I don't know if this is a question for you or for staff, but the powder activated carbon was not online at the time of the last event. My understanding was because it was a new installation, correct?
Correct. We were actually in the startup mode, and that's why the lab did the extra samples to see if it was effective at removing the the toxin.
So this wasn't a resource we had at our disposal that was just sitting there inactive for any reason. This was a brand new facility. And I think if I remember correctly, this was the reason that the toxin was even indicated in the first place, because you were doing the startup testing on the powder activated carbon installation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, you can continue. Thank you.
Sure. Please continue to interrupt if there's any questions. I can't see very well what's going on there. So by way of clarification, I just wanted to show a couple of pictures here of what powder activated carbon is. Powder activated carbon is like charcoal, and it's very, very, very finely ground, and it's extremely effective at pulling organic compounds out of water, and these cylinder spermopsin chemicals are organic compounds. And the chlorine we're talking about is bleach. We put very, very low levels for disinfection in the drinking water, and it is quite effective for cylinder spermopsin removal as well. We did find that there was room for optimization. Our historical data review found that there was room for optimization, but we wanted to balance that without creating new challenges. And some of those new challenges, every water treatment plant in America is required to ensure low levels or no levels of pathogenic organisms coming out of the water treatment plant. Also low levels of disinfection byproducts. You heard Daryl mention that. Disinfection byproducts are formed with the addition of disinfectants, including chlorine. So we need to make sure those are maintained below safe levels. And then, of course, lead and copper compliance. The lead and copper rule revisions went into effect in December of 2021, and we need to make sure that nothing we suggested doing at the water plant to improve the cylinder spermopsin treatment would impact any of these regulated parameters in a way that did not, that put the city out of compliance with any of those. So we were sort of balancing those in our evaluation. And our evaluation was extensive. Daryl made mention of some in-plant testing. He was perhaps being a little humble because there was a ton of in-plant testing being done. We evaluated this in-plant testing and took a good hard look at some of that data to find opportunities for optimization. We performed process modeling using some tools that are available through the American Water Works Association and some research, also some research level tools to really develop a sense of what the historical treatment risk profile looked like and how we could implement treatment processes to significantly reduce that risk level. And you can see here just simply, don't worry about the numbers, but red indicates higher risk and green indicates lower risk. And then with some of these identified options that looked promising, we performed significant bench testing using West Palm Beach water to really delve into the opportunities to the ability for some of these treatment processes to significantly reduce cylinder spermopsin. And the findings from this study were as follows. PAC was generally, by the in-plant testing, PAC was generally shown to be effective at removing cylindrospermopsin. In addition, lower pH on the order of around 7.5 was, along with elevated chlorination, those strategies were shown to work well. And these were strategies that were implemented by the plant in the response and shortly after the response to the May 2021 event. And those were shown quite effective at reducing levels of cylindrospermopsin. Biological filters, which the city employs, have in some cases also been shown to be effective, but the city's biofilters were not shown to be quite as effective as some of the literature suggested may be possible. The process modeling verified this idea that oxidation, that chlorination at pH of 7.5 was capable of lowering risk of cylindrospermopsin. We also found that combining the oxidation in that pipe segment, in addition to the UV wet well, so that extending that contact time and extending that chlorine dose, we're able to greatly reduce risk and essentially oxidize any cylindrospermopsin that came into the facility. We also found the potential of another pre-filter chlorine location that might further reduce risk, but we wanted to evaluate the potential implications of disinfection byproducts. So we looked at those through bench testing, and our bench testing that showed that increasing the powdered carbon dose and also potentially switching to a new powdered carbon product could provide some more robust treatment of cylindrospermopsin. It again verified that chlorination at pH of 7.5 with slightly elevated doses was very effective at oxidizing cylindrospermopsin. And here we looked at two pre-filter chlorination strategies, one where we chlorinate the raw water right when it comes into the plant, and one where we chlorinated water in the flume after we'd had a chance to reduce organics, background organics, which are known to lead to disinfection byproducts. So when we tested the raw water chlorination, the chlorine coming right out of Clear Lake, East Clear Lake, we found that it was effective for cylindrospermopsin, but that the chlorination increased the DBPs too much. However, when we had that sedimentation process that occurred before we chlorinated, so when we looked to chlorinate in that flume segment between the sedimentation and the biofilters, we found that flume chlorination was very effective without significantly increasing the disinfection byproducts. So as I mentioned before, through all of this testing, we found that optimization was capable of providing meaningful cylindrospermopsin risk at the city's water treatment plant. So pulling that forward in a series of technical recommendations, on the treatment side, the city is currently using all of the treatment evaluation findings and has been for a while now to develop monitoring and a triggered treatment protocol that's specifically designed to reduce the risk of cylindrospermopsin. And in the longer term, the expert panel has recommended a long-term holistic approach to understanding future source water management and treatment strategies, not just of cylindrospermopsin, but also potentially of other contaminants of concern. And it's important to note that with the new tools, the new optimization tools in place, the city now has time to perform this holistic evaluation the right way, considering long-term options, long-term treatment options, if they are required even, to achieve the water quality goals. In sum, we've built the city a much larger toolbox. And it's a toolbox where the tools are organized and understood and well implemented in the event of a future cylindrospermopsin event. Just as a potential preview of what that holistic long-term look, different technologies could look like if it was necessary, we've identified cylindrospermopsin here on the top, but also other future potential contaminants of concern, including other cyanotoxins like microcystins and others, potential for taste and odor, other contaminants of emerging concern, that's what CEC, and then finally pathogens is a great consideration. And we looked at a series of technologies, and this was just a very, very high level look. The next step would be that long-term deep dive into these technologies to determine what's appropriate. And the first step in that is to determine what what water quality challenges the city is really at, and understand what risks need to be reduced. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Libby Bakke to describe some of the communications actions. And Libby is with Barney and Worth, and she's an expert in water quality communications. And what was really, really useful for this project was that she worked with closely with the city of Salem in Oregon on a response to their 2018 cyanotoxin event. So with that, Libby?
Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Libby, before you start, excuse me, this is the mayor. Eric, before you go there, can you go back to slide 19? Because I want to make sure I understand kind of where we are even before we get to the communications. So it sounds like we're attacking this issue from two different perspectives. One is the source water, and we have some ideas on how the water, even before it reaches the plant, we minimize the risk of cyanotoxin infection, and that's by mixing with more groundwater and some other things. So, and to the extent that we are not successful there, we have a more robust treatment program once it hits the plant. Is that a correct kind of summary? We're really trying to attack it at the source level, and we have a strategy for once it does hit the plant.
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
Exactly correct.
All right. Any other questions, commissioners, before we go to the communication strategy, which is very important as well? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So Libby, you're back up.
I'm back up. Thank you, Eric. So along with what Eric has been talking about, the expert panel also made a number of communications recommendations that are completed and underway. And Eric, if you go to the next slide. So there's three main recommendations. One is ongoing customer communications. The second one is seasonal communications. And the third, very important, is the public notification protocols. So ongoing customer communications, that's the information that provides information to customers about ways to learn about West Palm Beach drinking water. So in August of 2021, the city launched two information pages. One, protecting water quality, source to tap, and that has information about the sources of the city's drinking water, how it's treated, the water quality parameters that are tested. The second website that was launched was the Safe Water Dashboard. And that page, you can see a little clip of it here, is where sampling and test results have been posted. And they've been posted since August of 2021. And you can visit there today and see the very latest data and the status there. That green bar, you can see there that the water is safe to drink. So those two are ongoing. Seasonal customer communications is related to proactive information for customers about any potential seasonal cyanotoxins concerns. So again, timely, useful information for customers interested in cyanotoxins and water quality. I think the third most important thing that the city did, and Daryl was very involved in creating this and tying it closely with operations at the water treatment plant, is the public notification guidance. So the city has developed a harmful algae response plan that includes communication protocols and has public notification templates. So this notification guidance is very much, it's far more robust than anything that's required, even here in Oregon where we have cyanotoxin rules. And it puts the city in a very proactive place for communicating with the public about cyanotoxins if there's ever an event in the future. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Eric.
This is the mayor again. Before you go off that slide.
Sure.
Okay, so where can the public access this information? Is this on the city's website?
Yes, it's on the city's website. Eric, if you go back one slide, that is the webpage for it. So public utilities protecting water quality source to tap. And on that page are all the links to the sites and the Safe Water, the data site as well.
All right, I'm looking at my communications team. Let's make sure we do another couple of efforts to get this information out to the public. The more we get this in front of them, hopefully the more it will be part of their DNA. Yes, Mr.
And Mayor, this is a reminder. As Libby mentioned, as we get into the high season in terms of heat and rain events that may impact cyanotoxins and other types of algae, we'll make sure we're constantly communicating on a seasonal basis as well, because these are seasonal events for the most part.
And this information is updated how frequently?
The testing information is monthly?
The testing month, right now we're doing bi-weekly sampling for the point of entry with the toxin sampling. As the season increases, that'll probably go to weekly. For the last 3 months, our cyanotoxin levels have been below detection. So the game plan on this sampling method is to reduce the toxin sampling during the non-algae season, spend the money during the algae season to really ramp it up on that side of the sampling there.
And are test results posted on this website? Okay, very good.
Yes, they are. We're looking at increasing, because we did get replies back. People want to see the trend. They want to see not just today, what was it last week and the week before? Are we trending up or down? So we have looked at, and that page most likely will revise it a little bit to provide some more information.
Okay. Other questions before we move to office? Yes, Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this information. I think, the communication plan is extremely important in how we're communicating internally and how we're communicating with the public. I know some of the challenges we had surrounding the previous incident was water is organic. At any given time, it's going to have some level of algae in it. There was no real reportable standard from the state or any other water authority on if you're at any level from a 1 to a 10, at what point does it become a toxin that needs to be reported to the public? Does it become a danger to the water source? Have we gotten more clarity on what that looks like?
I can say no to that the state has not moved forward with any guidance that I'm aware of, any regulatory work that we're aware of at this point. We're looking, and the health department's initial guidance to us back last May follow the state of Oregon's policy, or actually they did adopt the monitoring rule. Our rule is similar to that, not our rule, but our sampling, our treatment, and our monitoring, all of that is being tied pretty much to that, which is.
What is our standard then? When are we making that determination, and how are we making that determination for what is an acceptable level of cyanotoxin compared to a potentially dangerous level of cyanotoxins?
Okay, so the EPA has identified the health advisory levels. They are set. The issue with those is they're non-regulatory, non-binding. They're out there for our use as we see fit, both the utilities and the governmental agencies. So, you want to go a little more on that? Okay.
So you have this advisory level, and the idea behind the website is that even if we're below the advisory level, that information will be there, will be published of what as Daryl said, what the trend line is, and then folks can make the decision on their own whether they want more information and dive deeper into that, or they want to just discontinue water. That's going to be up to the individual. But in terms of the level for advisory, that is published by the EPA, and that is what we're looking at, and that is what requires that 10-day period where we're going to be not only trying to confirm results, but getting the levels below an advisory level within those 10 days, because that is what the EPA has determined is the safe period that you can still consume the water.
So at any given time, the public can go on at the website and monitor what our latest testing is, and if that would be anything below the advisory level. But if it escalates to an advisory level, part of the algae response plan would detail out how that information is communicated over to administration and then distributed to the public through various channels so that we can get that message far and
Correct.
wide if it would get to that point.
Correct. Before that 10-day period, we'll be sending samples to the lab to get confirmation, but during that time, the public will be notified, commissioners, all of our customers will be notified, and it'll be on our website, but we won't issue an advisory unless it's necessary.
All right, thank you.
Either Mr. Fon or Darrell, so the templates that we've established, one of the issues we had last spring is that we were waiting so long for the Department of Health to sign off on the language. Are these templates approved by the Department of Health so we could run with them right away, or do we still have to submit something to them and we're in a holding pattern until they bless the language?
Okay, so the templates and the program is written. All the templates have to be put together, and we do want the health department to review the 3 templates. 1 for disinfection switch, 2 for cylindrospermopsin advisory, and the 3rd one for the microcystin. We're going to be ready for that even though we're not seeing it. And we do need to meet with them before we go public with the whole strategy and the communications plan. Overall, I've tagged 4 pages of contacts that need to be called. Everyone from the mayor to all of you, to our partners with the towns, they're in there. Who's going to make those calls? I'm making sure that everyone can get either a call from the key person or a secondary person. So you should be hearing it from 2 people all the time, never just one of us. The idea is to get the notice to you, and I'm going to start with day 0 is the day we pull the sample. Figure day 2, 3, we get the results back from our labs. That by day 3 or 4, it's confirmed. You're hearing it that early. Last year, you heard it on day pretty much 9, 10. We don't want to be there anymore. We want everybody to get as much leadway to either a chlorine switch, because on a chlorine switch, we have to call the pet stores. We call the dialysis centers and the hospitals, because that free chlorine interferes with their treatment processes. We call the towns. We have to get it approved. 24 hours is the minimum amount of time we have for a chlorine switch. So yeah, we're working on that, and it's a lot. Okay?
But the most important thing, the most important takeaway I'm getting from this is that we are working on that protocol now.
Correct.
And so we will have that in place.
Correct.
Before we hit season, and we will follow that protocol to the T.
Correct.
Okay. And we're also trying to get the Department of Health to bless the language that at this point, rather
Yes.
than waiting until something happens.
Right, and we also want to clarify with them whether or not they, last year they issued their own health advisory. We want to clarify if that's something that they believe they have to do every time or not. That's a big question, because in which case, then if they're saying we can't, we have to wait to theirs, we want to get all that worked out with them.
Yeah. So we're being proactive on this
Correct.
At this point. Any other questions? Commissioner Lambert and then Commissioner Warren.
Thank you. Just a quick point of clarification. Excuse me. When you had mentioned having to, I'm over here. Oh, over here. I know it's hard to
can't
tell
tell,
with the
no,
masks. It's okay.
I get confused often.
Let it burn, okay.
You had mentioned notifying the pet stores. I just wanted to make sure in our emergency plan as well that we're also considering the zoo and then the science center, which is implementing one of the largest aquariums in the southeast. So I just want to make sure that they're in
Good point.
consideration.
Usually it is fish that they're worried about, the aquariums, so we'll check with them as well, get them on the list. The one big thing that we did do, we coordinated with the county EOC for the Everbridge system to send out the alert, and that would be done through our emergency center with the notice. We used to have a reverse 911 system, so
Commissioner Warren.
there we go.
It seems that every time Commissioner Lambert cuts her hair, I cut mine, so I understand how that can be confusing. So there were a couple of things that Dr. Rosenfeld mentioned that I would like to talk about. But first, I would also like to thank staff for recognizing ways to reduce the turnaround time of samples so that we can respond much more efficiently for all of us. Thank you very much for those improvements. What I heard Dr. Rosenfeld say is that the problem that we experience is unique because we predominantly use surface water, while most others use groundwater. And I believe that I also heard Dr. Rosenfeld state that when there was a hybrid or a blend of incorporating well water or well fields into the surface water, that improved the outcomes. So are we doing anything proactively with that, or how are we utilizing that information as we move forward?
Okay, the blending is basically diluting, and it's doing two things with the good groundwater. Number one, it was missing the nutrients that were coming down in the surface water. So we starved the algae somewhat. That's one of the studies I really want to look at. That's an upcoming one. The second, basically, the M canal had been shut off in April to us at Control 4 because there was a blue-green algae, the microcystin algae, had been pumped in and received from Lake Okeechobee, got into our system way out west. Our guys isolated it and treated it with the hydrogen peroxide, which is something that we've been doing here at the city. I can go back 15 years that I've been involved with the city, that it's been done, and we've held it up as a model to the district saying, why can't you go treat the bloom before it blows up? If you hit it when it's small, you kill it right then and there. Doesn't have a chance to get out of hand. So that's the two big things there with the blending of the water. We have met with the Water Management District. Our expectation there was that the groundwater would have been more of an issue than the lake elevation. It turns out that they agree that the blending is a very effective option. And we pointed out that when we get halfway to the health advisory level within the raw water, we'll be contacting them for the permission to use the groundwater wells as we need it. And when we were advised that we would get the answer. And
I've gotten assurances from the South Florida Water Management District that as soon as we advise them that we need to do that blending, that they will allow access to the well fields. And we've also put in a permit modification application to do both the groundwater from the wells and also adjust the lake levels higher, which would be more of a longer-term fix. And we're going to need to present some studies to the South Florida Water Management District on those, and that'll be an ongoing process. But we have good dialogue and good communications with them and feel confident we'll have access to the well fields when needed.
we will add too, there's a lot of people coming to us on treatment options for the lake to keep the algae levels down, and those will be looked at. They've been ranged from ideas that really focus on the blue-green microcystin and not what we have, the cylindrospermopsin. But each of those will have to be looked at. And hopefully if we can find something that cleans it out of the lakes, that's the cheapest answer, I believe. So,
But that's more long range, and that's
Long
really
range,
somewhat
correct,
outside of
yeah.
our control.
optimization is a word that you heard today several times by Eric. It's important. That pack costs us $1.37 a pound, and we use 4 pounds a minute. Last year, our budget was only $50,000 for carbon. We spent $1.1 million. You're going to hear me coming back in a few months asking for money for carbon and chemicals. They're going up through the roof. Between the COVID impacts on the supply chain for the raw materials for our chemicals, all the way to the drivers that bring it to the plant, we have problems. Last year, our carbon vendor was unable to deliver us carbon on 3 separate times. That's why we were up and down on that startup. We did go out with an ITB this year. We've got a new vendor. Actually, the vendor that won the contract was the people who came in under the emergency order and provided us the carbon that we needed. Also, Eric talked about types. Wood seems to be, our carbon right now is based on coal, but the wood seems to really be the best, and that's supported by the literature that we saw. Unfortunately, really only the vendor that One, the solicitation is able to provide us wood. The other one told us they were completely allocated out. So it is a commodity that may be hard to get. So we will have to optimize that.
Well, I was going to say, can we start acquiring that now? Does it store it well? I mean, and just...
We got a
hold on.
silo full of the
Okay.
coal-based, so we'll have to use that. That's about $180,000 worth of carbon that we have available. And what Eric was showing up there and the jar testing that we've done shows that we can get up to a 60% reduction through the carbon alone, which would be great. We were getting about a 25-30% of the other coal. So, but the big issue here is the chlorine, which is the more cost-effective way, helps us. So we want to optimize those two, get as much as we can from each source. The chlorine adds those disinfection byproducts. That's now my biggest concern. You all know that we went out of compliance last year because testing occurred while we were in the middle of fighting this event. And we've since then been sampling every quarter. This is the fourth quarter coming up in May. That'll be our last sample. This quarter sample that just finished, we were, again, our levels are low, less than half of what the standard is. Okay, but we're still averaging in that huge number from last June. All right?
Okay. Did you have any follow-up? Okay.
Whenever I watch those Mad Max movies, there's always an issue with the water supply, so I'm sure that you'll get overwhelming support for ensuring our water quality. When I see slide 10, it shows the source water systems. Do we first draw from Lake Okeechobee? Is that the primary source, or is it all of these?
It's one of our sources. And 50% comes down through from Lake Okeechobee in the L8 Basin through the L8 Canal, which we pick up with our control structure 2 out west, pumps it into the M Canal.
Is that it?
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you so much for the update today. I know that it was mentioned that we're monitoring for other possible toxins. Are there any that you are monitoring for that you think might have as equally as dangerous and health implications as this toxin? Or just wondering if there's any way we can be getting ahead of it or preparing for some of the other things that you're looking at?
Okay, I keep talking to my counterparts over at the town of Palm Beach, and there's a handbook of chemistry and physics that's about this thick, with all types of chemicals and compounds in there. So, yeah, there's a long list of chemicals that could be coming down. EPA has just published the 5th round for the unregulated contaminants. We'll have the sample for those. Surface water and groundwater have different contaminants of concern. For all the years, surface water was bacteriological contamination. All right, now all of a sudden we're into, I guess, biological or algae related. So there is a lot, and we do sample for a lot, most of which is regulated. Pesticides, the whole list. I think there's 250 chemicals we sample for every year, besides the ones that are more short-term, like this one here, the acute hazards that we have to worry about.
So, and just to remind you that in this case, this linospermopsin, we were monitoring something that was an unregulated toxin. So it's the same. We are constantly looking at what are the emerging toxins. And Mayor, I think we have one more slide left on the presentation, so maybe we can kind of get through that and then
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
That's
get
fine.
to the final questions.
Who's presenting this slide? Dr. Rosenfeld?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
This is just I think Daryl was going to come up and talk through it a little bit as well, but this is just a summary of our recommendations in source water, treatment, and communications And I don't want to go through and read this. I just wanted to indicate that it was sort of cut down in between near-term implementation recommendations and long-term implementation recommendations for both source and treatment. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is this green line down here is today. And you can see that many of these important keys, these important recommendations have already begun the implementation phase at the city. So the city is working hard to get out ahead of many of these pieces, many of these recommendations, and has implemented many of them. And as we mentioned before, working together holistically to increase the reliability, to decrease the risk of cylindrospermopsin from the water plant. So Daryl, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Eric, I think we can go to the question slide, but that basically
Okay.
just gives an overview of the timeline of these different options. But I want to emphasize one of the big takeaways here, and that is that the things that the city has already implemented, especially with the chlorine and some of the other treatment options that were discussed today, have greatly reduced the risk of a further event happening. And so we feel really confident about now we can move forward, as was previously said, with some longer-term options, at least studying those longer-term options if they're needed, because we do have the treatment options in place now and the better communications that'll put us in a much better position than we were 8 months ago. So with that, we'll go ahead and take any questions from the expert panel or from staff.
Thank you, Armando. Thank you, Daryl. And thanks to all of the members of the panel who are under the sound of my voice. Commissioners, as you can recall, I wanted to put this panel together because I wanted to make sure that we took advantage of an unfortunate situation to make sure going forward we were as resilient as possible to a repeat of this event. And the information that the panel has come up with that's been presented to you today provides me with a significant level of comfort and assurance. Is it a guarantee? Absolutely not. However, I think there were some lessons that we learned, and I believe the panel has shown that we are implementing procedures, policies, protocols that will help us be more resilient to repeat. So thanks to all involved. I know it's taken some time, but that time to me is reassuring because it shows that you did not rush to any conclusions, that you considered all the data, did all the testing necessary before you came back to this group, this body, with the recommendations. So thank you, and I do believe, strongly believe, that our system is better off as a result of the work of the panel. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Schoaf?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to staff and to the mayor for putting together this panel. And I think there's not hardly one more important topic than this. And I guess the way I would look at this is going forward, our algae response plan. I think that's something that you indicated we're in the process of putting together, vetting with various agencies, et cetera. Is that something that will be shared with the public eventually, or how will that be communicated?
So I think there's going to be segments that'll be shared with the public. Some of it is internal operations, but the stuff in terms of the thresholds of when we would notify certain parts of the public and customers, certainly that we could share. But it really is an operational plan more than anything else. Sure,
and I think we have various operational plans through the EOC. Is this a plan that will then be run through the EOC like any other potential hazard or communication, emergency type communication when we have a hurricane that'll run through the EOC? If there would be any kind of event throughout the city that would kind of run through the same channels, is the intent to make this one of those activities, or is this something external to that?
So, yeah, the EOC definitely plays a role, particularly when we start getting into the public notification piece and making sure we're getting the word out to the broadest audience possible, both our communications and our EOC. And as soon as we start seeing levels that are above, let's say half of what the notification requirement would be, we'll begin those discussions with Brent Bloomfield and other folks at the EOC to begin to plan for the potential.
Thank you, and I appreciate that we're putting those structures in place, because I think one of the most important things out of here is we're identifying what we can do better, but mostly that pivotal communication piece is how quickly can we get out to the public to notify. So I appreciate that we're taking a look at that. Thanks.
And I think that the other piece of the communication is the ongoing information that is available to the public on our website. We're doing constant testing, and they will get the results of that. And we are trying to be as transparent as possible, even in the absence of an incident. And hopefully the public will appreciate that information as well.
And Mayor, I kind of want to address a little bit your point, which was excellent in terms of we have improved our processes. So when you look back now, you know, having history behind us and being able to look back at the incident, we had a week's worth of a no drinking order for those in vulnerable populations. So that was 1 week for specific segments of the population. And the time preceding that was a very quick turnaround, by the way, to get that fixed in a week. If you talk to Salem, Oregon, they were going through this for, I think, over a year, back and forth notices. And so for a week's worth of a notification for the vulnerable population, I think we've been able to now establish not only protocols and treatment, but also become a model for what other cities are going to do in the future. And so with everything, we have lessons learned, and we had a lessons learned. When I look back at it now, the price was a week's worth of a notice. It's a pretty low price to pay for the significant improvements that have been made, and that'll be made in the future as well.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you so much, and I agree. I think that ensuring clean water is one of the most important responsibilities we have as city leaders, and I just want to say thank you, Mayor, thank you to staff, thank you to the expert panel, because today you reviewed in this presentation, as well as in the report that we received, options for reducing incidents at the source, and then consistently evaluating and implementing treatment options, and then third, and equally important is a proactive, robust communications plan. And I just want to say thank you for that transparent process. I think that that's helpful for all of us as leaders on this dais, but is especially helpful for our residents so that they can have the information that they need to be able to make decisions. So I have two questions. The first is for Libby. I thought it was great that we were able to have an expert who has not only focused on water quality communications, but also with this toxin. And so, Libby, I was curious in your experience if you have found that there's a certain way of communicating this type of information. Clearly, there's, technology may vary from city to city, and the way we communicate is changing so rapidly, but I was just curious if those recommendations are in our plan as well.
Yes, so your questions are about the communication tools that are used to reach different audiences?
Correct.
Correct, yes. The communications plan does, in today's world, you have to use all the tools that are available to you, websites and social media and news releases. And as Daryl, in his plan, even picking up the telephone is still important to use. So I think that the plan does cover a wide variety of communications channels. The city already has a great communications toolbox, and so the plan does draw on those.
Great, thank you so much. And my second question is for staff. Will we receive updates regarding the next steps? I know that we have talked about permits with South Florida Water Management District. We've talked about the approval of templates with various regulatory agencies. Will we receive updates on when those have been processed?
Yeah, we'll let you know once we have final approval of the templates and so forth, which should be fairly soon.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify one thing. I think on one of the slides on page 10, when it talks about our source water, and it was mentioned that the lake system was implicated the most in the cyanotoxin blooms. And I was wondering if there's any evidence or research to show whether or not, the environmental aspects of the lakes, being closer to the highway, being closer to residents' backyards and things like that, made any difference as opposed to grassy waters, for example, which is much more preserved? It's away from those kind of elements. I'm wondering if there's any implication in terms of the toxins. Thank you.
Okay, right now I would say that we're not there. There's no looking to see if it was a local impact or if it was a repeated impact from years of getting high conductivity water from the L8 canal out there. So we're looking at that. Our former lab manager, algae was his life. He had a lot of opinions. Biggest thing he's concerned is that we're going to go ahead and carpet bomb the lakes to kill everything, because he says we need a good ecology in their system to keep it alive and well. That's why our water quality, he was always telling me how great it was. So yes, that's the type of studies we need to do, and it's something that'll be on the list.
President Peduzzi.
I think you had a similar question or a follow-up to Commissioner Fox's question. Dr. Eric had mentioned that the source of this last event were the lakes that were closest to our water treatment plant. Did we know that at the time the event was taking place, that the source of this algal growth was right there, closest to the treatment plant, or was that something that we found out later after studying the situation?
That was something we found out later. And it's in limited data. We only had a few sample points during the event where we went into the M canal and collected samples looking for the toxin, and it wasn't there. We know it's not going to be in the well water. The C17 canal system had been shut down. C17 canal has tested positive for this toxin. So we know that it's in our lakes, and we know that it's in the C17. And so that's part of what we talk about blending, is if C17 is higher than the lake, and we don't need the water, we don't even go there. We don't take it.
And as a follow-up, I know the time you were doing regular monthly testing, which wasn't necessarily required, but we were doing that monthly testing. Was that testing done at the plant location, or was it done elsewhere?
Okay, the toxin sampling was strictly related to the raw water coming into the plant and the water that was going out. There's other algae sampling that's going on. I go like this because they were actually visually looking at the algae and doing counts to see how much of a cylindrospermopsin was out there. And then we go to trying to correlate that to a toxin level. Okay, we got rid of all of that, having to do all of that guesswork by collecting that tool that allows us to read the toxin levels specifically to get a good screening on them. So.
And just a brief follow-up, and in the future, do we plan on conducting regular testing along the canals that we own, such as the M Canal at the L8, Grassy, and the canals that come into our lakes right near the water treatment plant?
Okay, yes is the correct answer to that.
Good.
But to be more specific, the plan that we wrote out has 3 levels of sampling. First is assessment. That's where we're going out into the lakes and the canals and pulling samples on frequencies that vary from monthly, to all the way to weekly, till we figure out what's going on during an event. We have process sampling. That's everything after the first pumps all the way up to the storage tanks. That's where all my treatment is. We're going to hit all those spots. Right now, we're coming in, and 8 are weekly. I want to know, we want to see, if you looked at that graph, we had once a month. That doesn't tell me a whole lot during the week where I'm at. So now we're able to get a response quicker and be able to do that. And then the last is the actual toxin sampling that is going out of the system. And that requires a different method of analysis. And that's one that we don't have. It's $1 million piece of equipment, and what I've been told, $1 million scientist to run it. Okay, so we're going to keep shipping up to the Greenwater Labs here in Florida. He has turned samples around for us within a day when we need them.
Thank you. I appreciate that information. One final question, Mayor.
Yes.
Are these lakes that are closest to our water treatment plant potentially more vulnerable because there isn't cover? There's the sunlight is able to directly impact the water, and my understanding is that some of these algal toxins feed on the sunlight, and of course evaporation that probably occurs more when you don't have tree canopies that we have in grassy waters and elsewhere. So are these lakes that are closest to our water treatment plant going to be more vulnerable just because they don't have tree canopies and shade going on?
I've heard shade balls, a black ball that actually floats, is a treatment option. Is that where you were going? Okay.
I've seen that where they dump the balls all
Yeah, it's
over and
on
it covers
YouTube
the whole.
if you saw it. They had a little different issues with that. One of the first studies that we have started is the light penetration, the water lake elevation, to see how far the light's getting down there. That is one of the reasons it's suspected that this toxin is further down in the water column. Just so everybody knows, the sampling we did last year, we did go off, collect samples from the bottom and the top, and the toxin was evenly distributed from top to bottom. Okay? 90% of it was the extruded toxin by itself. It was not the cells. So we know that we've got a toxin problem. Somewhere the cells are generating it, and that's what we really want to find out this year. We want to see that curve. I want to see where that toxin, where they cross, the extracellular and the intercellular differ. When that happens, we'll know, okay, this is the algae, this may be the time to treat it. So with the study that started about 2-3 weeks ago, that team, the engineers, and one of them is the expert here that was on our panel that's leading those studies, hopefully we'll be able to figure out if raising that another 2 foot is going to give us the benefit that they're expecting.
Thank you for that explanation. I think we're on the right track.
Okay.
Thank you. On slide 12, you mentioned some studies, and I just wanted to make sure you had stated, or we can learn the status of those studies. There's a low water elevation and water age study, I guess we're undergoing.
That's what I was talking about, was the low water right now.
Okay, so we're doing that study currently?
That one's funded and on its way, as well as the age, the water age.
Any idea when we might get the results of those studies?
I think we gave him about 4 months.
Okay, all right. And in the future, there's well-field blending study, lake water treatment options, alternative water sources. Those are more long-term, but
Longer term.
do we have any idea when we'll initiate those studies?
If the blending study, all depends on what happens this algae season. If we get to run the wells, that's when we run the blending study.
Okay.
We'll start looking for specific parameters that come out from the groundwater that we don't have that issue with the surface water. We'll track those through the lake system, and we'll see how they blend out. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
Armando, when you report back to us as a follow-up to this, maybe in the next 3 months, can you include in that report back the status of the studies?
Yes, absolutely. And just to Daryl's point, so some of these studies are based on actual conditions on the ground. So, and they're multi-year, and I think I mentioned in one of the slides, the good thing is we have the treatment in place now that buys us the time to be able to conduct these long-term studies and figure out if we need any additional capital investments or other treatment options as we move forward. So we feel pretty good that we've got the time to conduct these studies that are necessary in order to actually drill down on the best treatment options and the best options to prevent growth to begin with.
Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. Just one final point in our communication plan. You know, I know when an event hopefully will not happen again, but if and when something happens, the timing is so key. And so we tend to use the more tech savvy options of social media and getting out and about, but some of our most vulnerable residents are not very tech savvy. So if we can, in our communication strategy, see how we can quickly distribute a message in a medium that may be able to reach those that are not attached to their cell phones, I think it's something very important that we keep in mind.
No, that's a great point. And since you brought that up, I'm going to reach out to some of our nonprofit providers that work with some of the more vulnerable population, particularly elderly population, and see if we can get them in our communications plan, so we're making sure we're informing them. But I think we do have the assisted living facilities, I believe, are already on there, so that's one group that's already covered.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's important because we have a lot of elderly folks that are in their own homes throughout the neighborhoods, and a great grassroots communication system for door to door if needed. Thanks.
Commissioner Warren.
Can you tell me briefly when we would use UV treatment?
That he has listed on the list?
Yes.
Okay, Eric, you want to address that? That's the oxidation in UV versus the system that we have right now?
I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Throw that one to the expert.
So UV technology is sort of divided into two types of technology. There's the very effective disinfection technology, which is what you have implemented, and then there's the chemical treatment technology. The difference is that you can kill microorganisms, pathogens, with a very low amount of UV energy. And to get to the chemical oxidation, which is what we would be using to treat the cyanotoxins, you need to be at about a factor of 10 to 100 times more energy than you currently implement. So it would require significant upgrade in terms of equipment and also of energy use to do that. So the point, I think, is that the system you have is very effective for what it does, but it's not going to be the same system that would need to treat cyanotoxins. And because of the conditions at your facility, I would say that that UV technology would be very low on the feasibility list for treating cyanotoxins.
Clarify, what we have right now, the UV system would have to be pretty much replaced with a new UV system. And like I said, the cost benefit of that may not be there. We may have better options.
And we are considering to look at longer-term options, whether it's this, reverse osmosis. I mean, that's part of our
That's part
study
of
as we go
long-term
down.
range, yes.
But the advantage of where we are today in terms of not only if we can address source water concerns and get some help there, but our treatment strategy is it buys us time to conduct those studies appropriately, correct?
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, we're talking about treatment for cyanotoxins, but we're also have to look at our water supply, period, as a whole. So we are looking at additional water supplies, brackish water in the deep wells. That's a long-term process that will require significant capital investment, but we are beginning to have those discussions and look at that and have the discussions with South Florida Water Management District to be able to access those deep wells in the future, and then have the treatment in place to be able to do that, which, as I said, would be a significant capital investment. But one of the things we've talked about already is planning for that through hopefully some of the infrastructure monies that are coming from the federal government, and in the future looking at applying for those funds if it's deemed a viable option for the treatment and the capital needs that we have. So we are actively looking at that issue.
President Peduzzi.
Just one quick question, since the mayor had mentioned reverse osmosis. I see that you have RO/NF, and NF is nanofiltration. My understanding is nanofiltration, it will not work on cyanotoxins. Is that correct? Just RO is the gold standard if it comes to filtration.
Eric, you want to handle that one? I believe you're correct on there.
So there are some nanofiltration membranes that could work on cyanotoxin, but there is but they're very tightly wound nanofiltration membranes, and so they would be on the higher pressure end. It's not the same nanofiltration necessarily that is typically involved in groundwater treatment down there. There's a little bit more to it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I think the last time you were all presented to us, you mentioned that there were a couple of other cities that had gone through something similar. I believe they were maybe in the north, and so their environment might be a little different, the climate might be a little different, but I just wondered if there has been any follow-up with those cities to talk about the measures they've taken or any successes that they've had.
Okay, so Libby and her experience with Salem has probably been the best, the parallel that we've looked at, lessons learned from them. Their treatment, they went to carbon, and, that was something that we had. Their source water is a little different than ours, so there's a different challenge there. And Libby, I don't know if you want to speak to it, but I know that she has told me we had a lot more tools to start with than what they had out there. They were putting their carbon into the river that was feeding their well fields, or basically their retention area where they pulled their water from. And they do pull their water from, I believe, is this correct, Libby? It's underground, it's an impoundment, and the wells, it's horizontal wells underneath that they pull the water from, which is a thought we had. Can we, line wells around the lake? And then when I see what happened out there, and I don't know the details how deep that is, but if the toxin moves through the ground, the soil, then we really aren't gaining anything in the long run there. So.
Any other questions, comments? Well, again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to staff. I believe this gives us a very solid path forward and plan and strategy. And again, we're continuing to look at longer-term solutions for both water supply and water quality going forward. But what you've laid out before us gives us a solid strategy for buying us the time that we need. So thank you very much, and we will get updated information going forward, and we will also continue to posting testing results on our website so the public can monitor that as well. Very good. Thank you all very much. Eric and Libby, if you're still there. All right, Commissioners, I don't have anything else for the good of the body. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to bring to this group at this time? Okay, hearing none, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all so much.